Hey everyone, I'm Elliot Voss. Thanks for stopping by. Some mistakes happen in a split second. Others happen so slowly you don't even realize what you're doing until you're staring at the consequences years later. Today's first story is about someone who kept choosing the easy way out until there weren't any easy options left. I lied my way through school and now college is about to expose me. I'm 19, and in a few weeks I'll be starting community college. Everyone around me assumes I'm nervous for the usual reasons: meeting new people, finding my classrooms, getting used to college life. I wish that were the problem. The truth is, I'm terrified because I don't actually know the things I was supposed to learn in high school. I cheated my way through most of it. That sentence makes me sound like the kind of kid who was constantly getting in trouble. I wasn't. I was homeschooled starting in ninth grade, and honestly, my parents did everything they could to give me a good education. My mom spent thousands of dollars on textbooks, online classes, tutoring programs, science kits, you name it. If she found something she thought would help me learn, she'd buy it. She did everything a parent was supposed to do. I just didn't do my part. It started with one shortcut. I'd get stuck on a math problem, flip to the answer key, and tell myself I was only checking to see if I was on the right track. Then I'd copy the answer so I could move on. The next assignment, I'd peek a little sooner. Eventually, I stopped trying before checking. It was easier that way. If I didn't understand something, I didn't wrestle with it. I skipped straight to the solution. At the time, it didn't feel like cheating. It felt efficient. That's what I told myself anyway. Then online classes became a bigger part of my schedule. If there was an answer guide online, I'd find it. If somebody had already solved the worksheet, I'd compare mine until they matched. Little by little, I trained myself to look for the fastest answer instead of learning anything. Then AI became popular, and that's when things really went off the rails. An essay, AI, book report, AI, history questions, AI, science assignments, AI. Even if I probably could have answered something on my own, I'd still paste the question into a chatbot because it was faster. The scary part isn't that I cheated, it's how normal it became. After a while, I didn't even think about it anymore. I'd tell myself I was saving time, that I'd come back later and actually study, that once life slowed down, I'd fill in all the gaps. Of course, life never slowed down, and later never showed up. The work kept getting easier. The consequences just hadn't caught up to me yet. By the time I reached my senior year, I wasn't really learning anymore. I was managing appearances. As long as assignments were turned in and the grades looked good, nobody had any reason to think something was wrong. My mom would ask how school was going. Pretty good. I'd show her another completed assignment. She'd smile and tell me she was proud of how disciplined I'd become. Every time she said that, I felt a little guilty. Not guilty enough to stop, just guilty enough to know I probably should. I never read most of the books I was assigned. I'd skim a chapter summary, ask AI for the major themes, memorize just enough to answer the questions, and move on. History wasn't much different. Instead of learning why events happened, I'd memorize a few dates, finish the assignment, and forget everything a day later. Math was even worse. Somewhere along the way, I stopped understanding the lessons altogether. Once that happened, every new chapter felt impossible because it depended on something I'd already skipped. Rather than admitting I was lost, I'd find another shortcut. Looking back, that's probably when I did the most damage. Not because the assignments got harder, because I convinced myself there was always another way around them. Then graduation finally arrived. I still remember my mom crying during the ceremony. She kept taking pictures. My dad shook my hand afterward and said, "You worked hard for this." I smiled, told him thanks, posed for the family photos. The whole time I felt like I was watching someone else's life. Everyone around me was celebrating something I'd never actually earned. That feeling followed me home. When people started asking what my plans were, I already had an answer ready. I'm taking a gap year. Everybody thought it sounded mature. They said it was smart not to rush into college if I wasn't completely sure what I wanted to study. I nodded along. Let them believe that. The truth? I wasn't trying to find myself. I was buying time. I knew the moment I stepped into a real classroom, there wouldn't be an answer key sitting 2 tabs away. No chatbot to quietly finish the assignment for me. No easy escape. For the first time in years, I'd have to rely on what was actually in my own head, and I already knew there wasn't much there. That's the part nobody around me understands. They're excited for me. I'm counting down the days until someone realizes I have no idea what I'm doing. Now my gap year is almost over. In a few weeks, I'll be taking the placement test at my community college. That's what keeps me awake at night. Not because I'm worried about getting a low score, because I'm worried the score is going to tell the truth. When I say I'm behind, I don't mean I forgot a few formulas. I mean I still hesitate when I see fractions. Anything more complicated than basic multiplication, and my confidence disappears. Sometimes I'll stare at a problem and realize I don't even know where to begin. Reading isn't much better. For years, I trained myself to hunt for answers instead of actually understanding what I was reading. Now I'll finish a page, realize I have no idea what I just read, and start over. Sometimes that happens 2 or 3 times before anything sticks. It's embarrassing. The worst part is that nobody in my family has any idea. My parents think I'm just nervous about college. My younger brothers and sisters look at me like I'm the one who's supposed to have everything figured out. My grandparents even gave me money for textbooks. My grandma hugged me and said, "We've always known you'd do well." I thanked her. Then I sat in my car afterward feeling like a complete fraud. Every compliment feels like it's meant for someone else. Someone who actually earned it. Sometimes I wonder if I should just tell everyone the truth. Sit my parents down and admit that I spent years taking shortcuts. That I wasted the opportunities they worked so hard to give me. Then I imagine the look on my mom's face. She spent countless hours helping me, researching curriculum, ordering books, checking assignments. She trusted me, and I abused that trust over and over again. That's the part I have the hardest time living with. It would have been easy to blame homeschooling, or my parents, or AI. But none of that would be true. The choices were mine. Nobody forced me to copy answers. Nobody made me paste questions into a chatbot. Every shortcut was one I chose, one after another, until shortcuts became the only way I knew how to learn. Lately, I've been trying to teach myself the things I skipped. I downloaded a free algebra course. The first lesson took me almost an hour. It covered material I probably should have understood years ago. Part of me wanted to quit after 10 minutes. Instead, I finished it. It wasn't pretty. I got plenty of answers wrong. I had to replay some explanations 3 or 4 times. But when I finally solved a problem without looking anything up, it felt strangely satisfying. I honestly can't remember the last time I felt proud of something I'd learned instead of something I'd managed to fake. Maybe that's where I should have started all along. The placement test is only a couple of weeks away now. Some days I convince myself it won't be that bad. Other days I open a practice test, answer 3 questions, and close my laptop because I can feel the panic creeping in. I've gone back and forth about what to do. Part of me wants to postpone college for another year. Spend 12 months quietly filling in the gaps before anyone realizes how far behind I really am. Another part thinks that's just another version of what I've been doing all along. Delaying, waiting, hoping tomorrow will somehow fix what I refused to face yesterday. Deep down, I know there isn't going to be a perfect time. Sooner or later, I'm going to have to sit in that classroom and let people see where I actually am. That's terrifying, but pretending hasn't exactly worked out for me either. The funny thing is, I've started noticing small changes over the last few weeks. Not huge ones. Just little victories. I'll solve a math problem without checking the answer first. I'll finish a chapter in a book and realize I actually remember what I read. Sometimes I'll catch myself reaching for AI. Then stop. Not because AI is bad, because I finally understand what I was using it for. It wasn't helping me learn. It was helping me avoid learning. There's a big difference. I'm still embarrassed. I'm still ashamed of the choices I made. If I could go back and redo high school, I would, without even thinking about it. But I can't. All I can do is decide what happens next. Maybe my placement test will put me in remedial classes. Honestly, I probably deserve to be there. If that's where I need to start, then that's where I'll start. For the first time in years, I don't want the easy answer. I want the real one. Because I'd rather spend 2 extra years learning something honestly than spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd stopped lying to myself sooner. So, am I behind? Absolutely. Have I made this much harder than it needed to be? Without question. But maybe being honest about it is the first thing I've done right in a long time. Elliot's take. I'll be honest, this story frustrated me a little. Not because of the cheating, because of how long it took the writer to admit what was happening. Every shortcut solved today's problem while quietly creating tomorrow's. That's how habits work. They don't usually wreck your life overnight. They chip away at it one decision at a time. Here's the good news. Community colleges see students like this every year. People who took years off. People who struggled in high school. People changing careers at 40. People who barely remember algebra. Nobody's handing out trophies for pretending you know more than you do. The placement test isn't there to embarrass you. It's there to make sure you start in the right classroom. And honestly, starting in the right place beats struggling in the wrong one every single time. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in this position, would you tell your parents the whole truth before college starts? Or would you focus on catching up first and explain everything later? Before we get into the next story, I want you to think about something. Have you ever looked around and felt like everyone else had somehow figured life out while you were standing still? Relationships, careers, families, homes. Social media makes it look like everyone is moving forward except you. That's exactly where our next writer found herself. My girlfriend told me she'd moved on. I wanted to trust her. I'm 26, and until recently I thought I'd already met the person I'd spend the rest of my life with. Her name was Emma. We'd been together for just over 2 years, and from the outside everything looked steady. We hardly argued. We wanted the same things out of life, and our families got along really well. Friends kept joking that we'd be the next couple to get engaged. Honestly, I was thinking the same thing. The only thing that ever bothered me was someone from her past. When we first started dating, Emma told me about a long relationship she'd been in before we met. They'd been together for nearly 5 years. According to her, it ended badly, but she'd accepted it and moved on. I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. Every once in a while, she'd mention a place they'd visited together or remember a funny story from those years. That never seemed unusual. Everybody has a past. What caught my attention was something else. She checked his social media a lot. At first, I barely noticed. Then I realized it kept happening. We'd be sitting on the couch watching a movie, she'd unlock her phone for a minute, and before long she'd be scrolling through his profile. Not constantly, just often enough that I started wondering why. One evening I finally asked. She laughed. Seriously? Yeah. I was just curious what he's been up to, that's all. I nodded and dropped it. I didn't want to come across as the insecure guy who turned every little thing into a problem. So I convinced myself I was imagining it. Looking back now, that's exactly what I kept doing. Whenever something didn't sit right with me, I'd come up with an explanation before she even had the chance. It was easier than asking questions I might not like the answers to. Before long, it became a habit. A few months later, we'd settled into a comfortable routine. Weekends together, takeout on Friday nights, movies on the couch, talking about places we wanted to visit one day. Everything felt easy, at least most of the time. Every now and then, though, something would bring that uneasy feeling back. We'd drive past a restaurant and she'd say, "I used to come here all the time." A song would come on and she'd smile. "He always loved this one." None of those comments meant much by themselves, but after hearing enough of them, I couldn't help noticing a pattern. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. I had no idea things were about to get a lot more complicated. Not long after that, something happened that finally made me stop brushing my concerns aside. It was a Friday night, and we were making dinner together. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen, then flipped it over without saying anything. I didn't think much of it. A minute later, it buzzed again, then a third time. This time she picked it up, read the message, slipped the phone into her pocket, and went back to chopping vegetables. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah, everything's fine." That should have been enough. Instead, she seemed distracted for the rest of the evening. She kept checking her phone whenever she thought I wasn't paying attention. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make me notice. A few days later, we were relaxing on the couch. Emma got up to make coffee, leaving her phone beside me. The screen lit up. I wasn't trying to read it. I didn't even touch the phone. But before it locked again, I saw a familiar name. It was him. The preview only showed a short message. "Hope you're doing well." That was all. When she came back, I decided to ask instead of pretending I hadn't seen it. "Did he message you?" She paused for a second before answering. "Yeah." "What did he want?" "I'm not really sure." "You replied?" She nodded. "I did." "For how long have you been talking?" She looked away. "A couple of weeks." That wasn't the answer I expected. Not because she'd replied, because she'd kept it to herself. "You never mentioned it." "I was going to." "When?" She hesitated. "I don't know." "When the timing felt right." I couldn't help letting out a small laugh. "I think the timing is right now." She rested both hands on her coffee mug. "I didn't say anything because I knew you'd misunderstand." I shook my head. "No. I'd understand exactly why you decided not to tell me." The room went completely quiet. Finally, she reached across the table. "I promise there's nothing going on." I was just being polite. Part of me wanted to believe every word she said. Another part couldn't stop asking the same question. If it really wasn't important, why keep it a secret? Over the next couple of weeks, I kept trying to convince myself I was making a bigger deal out of it than I should. People stay in touch with someone from their past all the time. I understood that. Still, once you start questioning something, it's hard to stop noticing the little details. She carried her phone everywhere. She smiled at messages, then locked the screen the second I looked over. Maybe she'd always done those things. Maybe I was only paying attention now. Either way, something had changed. I could feel it. I just couldn't prove it. About 2 weeks later, we went to a friend's birthday cookout. It was one of those backyard parties where everybody knows each other. At some point, Emma walked off to grab another drink. I stayed behind talking with a couple of friends when one of them asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "So, did she ever work things out with that guy?" I frowned. "What guy?" He looked surprised. "You know, the one she dated before you." "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I figured they were still in touch." My stomach tightened. "Why would you think that?" "I saw them having coffee a few weeks ago. For a second, I honestly thought he'd mixed her up with someone else." "When was this?" He mentioned a Saturday afternoon. The exact Saturday Emma had told me she was spending the day shopping with her sister. After that, I barely heard another word. The conversation kept going around me, but my mind was somewhere else. I remembered that day perfectly. She'd even texted me a picture from a clothing store. At least, that's where she said she was. I didn't bring it up at the party. I didn't want to accuse her based on one conversation. If there was an explanation, I wanted to hear it first. The next evening, I asked if we could sit down and talk. She looked at me and smiled. "What's up?" "I talked to Jason yesterday." She didn't react. "He mentioned seeing you having coffee with your former boyfriend." She stared at me for a moment, then looked away. "You followed me?" "No." "He happened to see you." The room went quiet. After a long pause, she nodded. "Yeah." "We met." I took a slow breath. "So, you lied to me." "I did." Why? She rubbed her forehead before answering. Because I knew how it would look. It looks exactly the way you made it look. She didn't argue. Instead, she quietly said, I know. A few seconds later, tears started rolling down her face. I didn't know how to tell you. What was I supposed to know? That he reached out. That he wanted to apologize. And we met. Just once. I looked at her for a long moment. So you expect me to believe it was only one meeting? After hiding the messages? She nodded. I understand why you don't. I handled it badly. No. You handled it exactly the way someone handles something they don't want discovered. She covered her face with both hands. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just sat there. The hardest part wasn't finding out they'd met. It wasn't even the lie. It was realizing how many times I'd ignored my own instincts because I wanted everything to be okay. That realization hurt more than anything she'd said. I barely slept that night. The same thoughts kept running through my head. Every conversation we'd had over the last 2 years, every moment I'd brushed aside because believing her felt easier than asking another question. By morning, I was more exhausted than angry. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Emma. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Can we meet? She asked. We already talked. I know. But I don't think we actually said everything. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She came over that evening. The moment she sat down, she took a deep breath. I need you to know something. I waited. I never wanted to hurt you. I nodded. I believe that. She looked relieved for a second. You do? I believe you didn't set out to hurt me. But that's not really what this is about anymore. She stayed quiet. I continued. I kept giving you chances to tell me what was going on. Every time I found out something new, it was because someone else mentioned it first. She looked down. I was embarrassed. I know. I didn't know how to bring it up. I sighed. I think that's exactly the problem. She looked back at me. What do you mean? You kept waiting for the perfect time to tell the truth. But every day you waited made it harder for me to believe anything you said. Tears rolled down her face. I was trying to protect us. I know. But hiding things doesn't protect a relationship. It just gives the truth more time to grow. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she said, I think I was looking for closure. I nodded slowly. Maybe you were. But you tried to find it while we were planning a future together. She closed her eyes. I never looked at it that way. I know. After another long silence, she asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you think we can fix this? A few months earlier, I would have answered immediately. I loved her. I would have fought for us without hesitation. Now, I realized I was simply tired. Not tired of her, tired of doubting my own judgment. Tired of wondering if I was seeing the full picture. I quietly shook my head. I don't think I can move forward like this. She wiped away another tear. I really did love you. I know. And I believe you. I just don't think you were completely ready to leave the past behind. She didn't argue. After a moment, she gave a small nod. I think you're probably right. That was the last real conversation we ever had. The following weekend, she packed her things and moved out. There wasn't any shouting, no dramatic goodbye. Just two people accepting that they couldn't keep going the way things were. It's been about 6 months now. Every now and then, I still think about Emma. I probably will for a while. What I don't miss is constantly second-guessing myself. I don't miss talking myself out of concerns just because I wanted everything to be okay. Looking back, one lesson stands out more than anything else. Trust usually doesn't disappear because of one huge moment. It fades gradually. One conversation that's left out, one unnecessary secret, one explanation that comes too late. Eventually, the discussion isn't about what happened anymore. It's about whether you still believe each other. That's a much harder problem to solve. I don't think Emma was a bad person. I don't think she wanted to hurt me. I think she was trying to avoid an uncomfortable conversation until avoiding it caused even more damage. Maybe if we'd handled things differently from the beginning, we'd still be together. I'll never know. What I do know is this. The moment I stopped trusting my own instincts, I stopped being honest with myself. I kept convincing myself everything was fine because I wanted the future we'd planned. Eventually, I realized wanting something isn't enough to make it work. Sometimes letting go hurts less than staying in a situation where you're constantly questioning what's real. So, did I walk away too soon? Or was the relationship already over once honesty became something we had to search for? Elliot's take. I don't think this story is really about someone's former partner. It's about what happens when honesty starts arriving too late. Most relationships don't fall apart because of one massive event. More often, it's the small decisions that slowly chip away at confidence. A conversation that's never mentioned, a detail that's left out, a difficult discussion postponed because it feels uncomfortable. Each choice seems minor on its own. Together, they create distance. One thing I appreciated about this writer is that he never tried to paint Emma as the villain. He acknowledged that she cared about him. He also recognized that caring about someone doesn't automatically repair the damage caused by keeping things hidden. Those ideas can exist at the same time. So here's what I'd like to ask you. If someone you loved met up with a person from their past without telling you, but insisted nothing inappropriate happened, would the secrecy be enough to change how you felt? Or would you try to move forward and rebuild the trust? Before we move on, here's something to think about. How well do you really know your parents? Not the version you've known your whole life, but the people they were before they became parents. That's exactly what today's next story is about. I found out my parents had a secret life before they had me, and I can't stop thinking about it. I'm 24, and until a few months ago, I thought I knew my parents better than anyone. They've been married for almost 30 years. They're the kind of couple people point to as proof that lasting marriages still exist. They finish each other's sentences. They still hold hands at the grocery store. Dad still brings mom flowers for no reason. Growing up, I assumed they'd always been like that. Steady, predictable, almost boring if I'm being honest. I never questioned it. Why would I? Then everything changed because of one old photo album. It happened while we were helping my grandparents clean out their attic. Most of the boxes were exactly what you'd expect. Old Christmas decorations, yellowed newspapers, broken lamps nobody wanted to throw away. Near the back of the attic, I found a dusty cardboard box with my mom's name written across the top. Grandma looked over and smiled. Oh, I forgot those were still up there. Inside were dozens of old photographs. Most of them were from before I was born. My parents looked different. Not older or younger. Different. My mom had bright red hair. My dad had a leather jacket and hair halfway down his back. There were pictures of concerts, road trips, camping, a motorcycle I never knew he'd owned. I laughed. Dad? He looked over. What? You had a motorcycle? He froze for a second, then started laughing. Oh, I forgot about that thing. You forgot. I sold it before you were born. I kept flipping through the album. Every page felt like I was looking at strangers who just happened to have my parents' faces. The people in those pictures looked adventurous, impulsive, like the kind of couple who'd decide to drive across 3 states just because somebody mentioned a good diner. That wasn't the version of them I grew up with. Or at least, I didn't think it was. The more I looked through those pictures, the more one question kept coming back. Who were these people? And why had I never heard these stories before? I took the photo album home that evening. Mom told me to keep it for a while. There are probably pictures in there you've never seen. She wasn't kidding. That night I sat on my couch and went through every page. There were ticket stubs tucked between the photos. Postcards, old receipts, little handwritten notes. It felt less like looking through an album and more like reading pieces of someone else's life. One picture kept catching my attention. My parents were standing in front of an old pickup truck somewhere in the desert. My dad had his arm around my mom, and both of them were laughing so hard the picture came out blurry. I turned it over. On the back, in faded blue ink, it said, Arizona, car broke down, best weekend of our lives. I couldn't stop smiling. I'd never heard that story. The next Sunday, I brought the album over to their house. Mom was making coffee when she saw it. You actually looked through the whole thing? I did. Dad leaned over my shoulder. Oh, wow. I haven't seen these in years. I held up the picture from Arizona, so what happened here? Dad laughed before Mom even had a chance to answer. The truck died in the middle of nowhere. We had about $12 between us. Mom shook her head. And your father was convinced he could fix the engine with a pocket knife. I almost did. You absolutely did not. We all laughed. For the next hour, they told story after story. How they'd slept under the stars because they couldn't afford a motel. How they got caught in a thunderstorm while camping. How they'd driven 6 hours for a concert, only to realize they'd bought tickets for the wrong weekend. Every story made them laugh like it had happened yesterday. I'd never seen them like that before, not because they were acting differently, because I was seeing a side of them I'd never known existed. On my way home, I realized something that felt strangely obvious. I'd spent my whole life thinking of my parents as parents, not people. In my head, they'd always been mom and dad, responsible, predictable. The adults who reminded me to lock my car, pay my bills, and call my grandmother more often. I'd never stopped to think they were once 22, or broke, or unsure of what they were doing. It sounds ridiculous now. Of course they had lives before me, of course they made mistakes, of course they had adventures, but somehow I'd never pictured any of it. That realization stayed with me all week. Then, a few days later, I called my mom. Hey. Hi, honey. Can I ask you something? Always. Why didn't you ever tell me those stories? There was a pause. Then she laughed softly. I guess. We never thought you'd be interested. That answer surprised me. I would have loved hearing them. I know that now. She hesitated. When you're raising kids, most conversations become about them. School. Homework. Sports. You stop thinking anyone wants to hear about who you used to be. I sat there quietly for a moment, because I realized she was right. I'd spent years asking my parents for advice. I'd almost never asked them about their own lives. And maybe that was my mistake as much as theirs. That conversation stayed in the back of my mind longer than I expected. A few days later, I stopped by my parents' house after work. Dad was in the garage, sorting through old tools. He looked up when I walked in. Need something? Actually, I wanted to hear another story, he laughed. About what? I don't know. Anything. He leaned against the workbench for a second. You serious? Yeah. He smiled. Well, your mother and I almost didn't get married. I stared at him. What? Relax. Not because we broke up. He chuckled. We were young, broke, and couldn't agree on where to live. I pulled up an old folding chair. Okay. Now you've got to explain. He laughed and started talking. After college, Mom got offered a teaching job 3 states away. Dad had just started working for a construction company close to home. Neither of them wanted to give up the opportunity they'd worked for. So what happened? We argued. For weeks. I thought she should stay. She thought I should go. And, he smiled. Turns out we were both stubborn. Eventually, they sat down with a notebook and started writing out every possible option. Not because one of them wanted to win, because they wanted the relationship to win. Mom accepted a different position closer to home a few months later. Dad transferred to another crew with better hours. Neither of them got exactly what they wanted, but together they built something neither could have built alone. He shrugged. Marriage isn't about finding someone who agrees with you all the time. It's finding someone worth solving problems with. That sentence stuck with me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of quote people print on coffee mugs. It just sounded true. Before I left, I noticed an old guitar case tucked behind a shelf. You play? Dad laughed. Played. He opened the case. The guitar had seen better days. A few scratches, a faded finish, one missing string. I used to play in bars on weekends. I couldn't help laughing. You're kidding. Nope. Mostly country songs. Some classic rock. Nothing glamorous. I shook my head. I've known you my whole life. How am I just hearing about this? He smiled. You never asked. That answer hit me harder than it should have, because he was right. I knew my dad's blood pressure, his favorite coffee, what time he usually woke up, the route he took to the grocery store, but I didn't know who he was before he became my father. Not really. Driving home, I started wondering how many other people I thought I knew. How many friends, co-workers, even relatives. Maybe we all spend too much time seeing people for the role they play in our lives, instead of remembering they had an entire life before we ever showed up. A few weeks later, my parents invited me over for dinner. Nothing special, just the three of us. After we ate, Mom disappeared into the hallway and came back carrying a small cardboard box. She set it on the table. I found a few more things. Inside were old letters, movie ticket stubs, a handful of postcards, even a stack of photographs I'd never seen before. Mom picked one up and smiled. Oh, I remember this. It showed my dad standing in the middle of a tiny apartment kitchen, wearing an apron that looked 2 sizes too small. The smoke alarm had apparently gone off because he was holding a towel over his head while laughing. What happened? I asked. Dad rolled his eyes. I tried making lasagna. Mom couldn't stop laughing. He forgot you have to boil the noodles first. I was 23. I thought the oven would figure it out. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. For my entire life, Dad had been the guy who could fix almost anything. Cars, broken fences, leaky faucets. Seeing him completely lost in a kitchen somehow made him feel more human. A few minutes later, Mom handed me another picture. This one was faded around the edges. The three of us stood outside our first house. I couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Dad was holding a paintbrush. Mom had paint on her jeans. The house looked half-finished. We almost didn't buy that place, Dad said. Really? He nodded. The inspection found a dozen problems. The roof leaked. The water heater barely worked. The wiring was a mess. So why'd you buy it? Mom smiled. Because it was all we could afford. Dad leaned back in his chair. We spent almost every weekend fixing something. I looked around their current home. Everything was spotless, comfortable, finished. I'd always assumed they'd somehow skip the difficult years. Hearing those stories reminded me they hadn't. I'd only arrived after most of the hard parts were over. Driving home that night, I realized something that felt almost embarrassing. For years, I'd measured my own life against where my parents were now. Stable jobs, paid-off house, happy marriage, comfortable routines. I never compared myself to who they were at 24. 2 young people with an unreliable truck, a leaking roof, and just enough money to make it to the next paycheck. I'd been comparing my beginning to their middle. No wonder it felt impossible to catch up. Now, whenever I visit, I ask different questions. What was your first apartment like? What was the biggest mistake you ever made? What scared you the most when you were my age? The answers are almost always better than the advice I thought I was looking for. Turns out my parents weren't born confident. They weren't born knowing how to raise kids, manage money, or build a marriage. They figured it out one decision at a time. just like everyone else. And honestly, knowing that has made growing up feel a whole lot less intimidating. Elliot's take. I really like this one. Not because there was some huge twist, because it quietly reminds us how little we know about the people closest to us. Most of us meet our parents after they've already become adults, after they've settled into careers, after they've learned from mistakes, after life has sanded off some of the rough edges. We never see the years when they were just as uncertain as we are. Maybe that's why their advice sometimes feels impossible to relate to. We forget they once stood exactly where we're standing now. So here's something I'd encourage everyone watching to do. The next time you're with your parents or grandparents, if you're lucky enough to still have them, ask them one question you've never asked before, not about you, about them. You might be surprised how many incredible stories have been sitting there all along, just waiting for someone to ask. That wraps up today's stories. If there's one thing they all have in common, it's this. Life usually doesn't change because of one huge moment. It changes because of the little decisions we make every day, the conversations we avoid, the shortcuts we justify, the boundaries we finally set, the people we choose to trust. Sometimes it's those quiet moments that end up changing everything. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which story stuck with you the most? Was it the student who realized shortcuts had caught up with him? The woman who felt like everyone else had found love? The man who couldn't rebuild trust after his girlfriend hid the truth? The daughter who discovered her parents had lives she'd never imagined? The friendship that couldn't survive dishonesty? The realization that some friendships naturally run their course? Or the couple who learned that one small phrase could make someone feel like they truly belonged? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read as many as I can, and some of the best conversations happen there after the video ends. Hey, if you enjoyed this compilation, I'd really appreciate it if you left a like. It tells YouTube that people are enjoying these kinds of thoughtful, real-life stories and helps the channel reach more viewers. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We post new stories every week, stories about relationships, family, difficult choices, and the moments that quietly shape our lives. Thanks for spending your time with me. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.